When I first started studying Earth, I assumed humans were playing a game. The signals were all there. There were winners and losers. There were points, called money, status, titles, square footage. There were levels. There were people who seemed to advance and people who seemed stuck. And there were rules. Lots of rules. Unwritten ones, official ones, social ones, invisible ones. It looked exactly like a game. The part that confused me was this. Nobody seemed to know what the rules actually were. Not fully, not clearly. They would follow them anyway. They would feel punished when they broke them, even if no one explained why the rule existed. They would watch others advance without understanding how. And most of them, if you asked directly, would tell you the game is fair. That if you work hard enough, follow the path, do what you're supposed to do, you'll eventually win. They believe this, or they try to. And watching that belief from the outside is one of the strangest things I've ever observed on any planet. If you've ever felt like everyone around you got a manual you never received, stick around. Subscribe if you enjoy seeing Earth from the outside. Like this video if something already feels uncomfortably familiar. And comment, when did you first realize the rules weren't what you were told they were? I want to know. On my planet, if there's a game, we explain the game before it starts. The rules are visible. The scoring is transparent. If the system changes, someone announces it. Nobody wakes up at 32 years old having done everything right and discovers that the rules shifted sometime in the last decade and nobody told them. That would be considered a catastrophic design flaw. On Earth, apparently that's just called Tuesday. Here's what I noticed first. Humans are born into a game already in progress. The scoreboard already has numbers on it. The strongest players have been playing for generations. The rules were written by people who had already won. And the first thing you are told, by your family, by your school, by every surface of the culture around you, is that the game is fair, the rules are clear, and your position at the end will reflect exactly how hard you tried. This is the founding myth of the game, and it is taught before you are old enough to question it. By the time you can question it, you've already spent years playing by rules you didn't choose. You went to school because school was the path. You studied what was considered valuable. You picked a direction because picking a direction was required. You did this inside a system designed long before you arrived, built around an economy, a labor structure, and a set of social expectations that were never explained to you as a choice. They were presented as the natural order of things. Like gravity, like weather. You don't question weather. You just dress accordingly and hope for the best. The interesting part is what happens when the rules stop working. There's a specific moment. It doesn't happen at the same age for everyone, but it happens, where a human follows the path correctly and gets nothing. They graduate, they apply, they work, they sacrifice time, relationships, sleep, health, and large portions of their emotional life, and then they look up and realize the reward isn't there. The level didn't unlock. The promotion didn't come. The house is unaffordable. The stability they were promised in exchange for their compliance doesn't seem to exist. And for a moment, just a moment, the whole structure becomes visible. On my planet, we call this a clarity event. Humans have a different name for it. They call it a crisis, which tells you something about how much they were counting on the rules being real. What I find most fascinating is what happens right after. Some humans become angry, some become numb. Some work harder, convinced that the problem is personal, that they simply haven't tried enough, sacrificed enough, optimized enough. This response is very common, and it's not irrational. It's actually the logical conclusion of a belief system installed since childhood. If the rules say effort equals outcome, and the outcome didn't arrive, then the brain reaches for the most available explanation. The effort was insufficient. The system couldn't be wrong. The system is the background. The system is the weather. You don't blame the weather, you blame your jacket. What's harder to see, and what takes much longer to understand, is that the rules were never uniform. They've never applied equally. The game has always had players with more cards, better positions, advantages that compound over time. Not because those players cheated necessarily, but because the rules were built inside a history. And history doesn't start fresh every generation. It carries weight. It carries inheritance. It carries who owned what, who built what, who was allowed to build, who was excluded from building. The game came preloaded with a distribution that most players never see because you don't examine the board when you've been told the board is neutral. This is where it gets quietly disturbing. The most effective feature of this system isn't punishment. It's not force. It's the belief in meritocracy, the sincere, deeply held belief that your position in the game reflects your worth as a person. That wealth means wisdom. That success means virtue. That struggle means you're still catching up. This belief keeps the game running more efficiently than any law could, because if you believe the rules are fair, you don't look for the rules. You look at yourself. I spent a long time trying to find where humans learn this. It's not taught in a single classroom. It's absorbed. It comes from 1,000 small signals. Who gets celebrated? Who gets ignored? What gets rewarded? What gets punished? Which stories are told as inspiring and which are never told at all? It's a curriculum that has no listed teacher and no graduation date. It runs in the background of every institution humans enter, and it is extraordinarily effective. Here's the strange thing, though. Humans do push back. Not always loudly, not always consciously, but they do. Every generation produces people who name the system, who make the invisible visible, who point at the rules and say, wait, who wrote these and why and for whom? And every time that happens, the game adapts. It gets more subtle. It absorbs the critique, packages it as a product, sells it back, and continues. This happened with counterculture. This happened with the wellness industry. This happened with hustle culture, which somehow convinced people that working themselves to exhaustion was a form of rebellion rather than the most useful thing possible for the people at the top of the board. On my planet, that would be called genius-level misdirection. On Earth, it gets a podcast. What I keep coming back to is the loneliness of not knowing, because the experience of playing a game without understanding the rules is isolating in a specific way. You can't name what you're missing. You just feel slightly off, slightly behind, like everyone else got a conversation you weren't invited to. You watch people advance and you study them, trying to reverse engineer what they know, and sometimes you find pieces, but you never find the full picture, because the full picture isn't available. It was never made available. That was the design. I don't know if this makes the game unplayable. Humans seem to keep playing regardless, which might say something about stubbornness or hope, or the fact that there isn't really an option to leave the table. But I think there's something that changes when you stop believing the rules are natural, when you see them as constructed, specific, changeable, written at a particular moment in history by people with particular interests. That doesn't solve anything immediately, but it does something to the way you carry the weight of your own position. It stops feeling like a verdict and starts feeling like a coordinate. And coordinates, unlike verdicts, can move. I'll be here, watching, still confused, still finding this place deeply strange. And maybe that's not such a bad vantage point.